The Galactic Council's message reached Earth on a Tuesday morning, transmitted through quantum relays that had taken 3 standard cycles to establish diplomatic contact. Ambassador Kellax of the Zephyrian Commonwealth stood before the assembled representatives of 47 species, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into nervous patterns. The war between the Keth Dominion and the Veltar Collective has raged for 2 centuries, she announced, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that marked her species' emotional distress. Billions have died. Entire systems lie in ruins. We have tried every diplomatic protocol, every linguistic algorithm, every cultural bridge we know. The 2 species simply cannot communicate without triggering violent responses in each other. The council chambers fell silent except for the gentle hum of translation matrices working overtime to process the various languages and thought patterns present. Kellax's form shifted to a deeper blue, hope tinged with desperation. We need something different, something unprecedented. Earth's linguistic capabilities are unique in the galaxy. Will you help us? Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth's newly appointed xenolinguistic attaché, reviewed the files on her tablet with growing concern. The Keth communicated through bioelectric pulses that carried not just meaning but ancestral memory fragments. The Veltar used scent-based language so complex it included temporal markers, emotional substrates, and probabilistic futures all in single words. Previous translators had suffered psychological breaks trying to process both simultaneously. "This isn't a job for a linguist," she murmured, scrolling through the psychological profiles of previous attempts. "It's a job for a poet." 3 days. Later, Marcus Rivera stood in the transport bay, a worn leather satchel containing his notebook slung over his shoulder. He'd spent the last 72 hours reading every xenolinguistic paper Earth had produced, but his real preparation had been decades of crafting words that could make strangers weep, rage, or find peace. "You understand what you're walking into?" Dr. Chen asked as the transport powered up. Marcus nodded, his dark eyes reflecting the swirling energy of the quantum drive. 2 species who've forgotten how to see each other as anything but monsters. Yeah, I understand. The neutral station orbited a dead star, its chambers designed to accommodate both species while keeping them physically separated. Marcus spent his first week in isolation, learning to process Keth bioelectric patterns through a neural interface that left him exhausted and occasionally overwhelmed by flashes of alien memory. The scent simulators for Veltar communication made his apartment smell like a greenhouse having an argument with a chemistry lab. But slowly, patterns emerged. The Keth pulses weren't just communication, they were art. Each transmission carried the weight of their entire cultural history, layered meanings that spoke of a species that valued legacy above individual existence. When they said negotiate, the bioelectric pattern included echoes of their first peace treaty, their greatest diplomatic triumph, and the memory of their children's children yet unborn. The Veltar scents were poetry in motion. Their temporal markers didn't just indicate when something happened. They painted pictures of possibilities, hopes, and fears. When they emitted their word for enemy, it carried the scent of burned homes from the past and the chemical signature of tears they might yet shed. Marcus realized the previous translators had focused on converting meaning from one language to another. But meaning wasn't the problem. The problem was that both species were trying to communicate their deepest selves, and those selves were being lost in translation. On the 10th day, he requested a joint session. The Keth delegation entered first, 7-foot-tall beings with chitinous plates and neural clusters that glowed with their bioelectric communication. The Veltar followed, their cat-like forms moving with liquid grace, the air around them shimmering with complex pheromone patterns. Marcus stood between them, neural interface active, scent processors analyzing the air. As the species began their usual opening statements, he felt the familiar clash of incompatible communications beginning to build. Then he did something unprecedented. Instead of translating, he began to speak. "The Keth remember the first star? They lost to war," he said, his voice carrying both the bioelectric harmonics and scent markers he'd learned to produce. In their pulses I feel the weight of 200 years of ancestor pain, the fear that their children's children will know only battle. The Keth delegation froze, their neural clusters flaring with surprise and recognition. The Veltar carry tomorrow's sorrow in today's words, Marcus continued, his scent producers filling the air with the temporal markers of regret and hope. They smell the possibility of peace in every breath, but also the fear that speaking it aloud might make it disappear. For the first time in 2 centuries, neither species responded with aggression. Marcus spent the next hour not translating their words, but translating their hearts. He showed the Keith how Veltar sent poetry carried the same reverence for future generations that drove their own ancestor memory transmissions. He helped the Veltar understand that Keth bioelectric pulses weren't attempts to overwhelm, but desperate attempts to share the full weight of their cultural responsibility. "You're both trying to say the same thing," Marcus finally said. Exhaustion, clear in his voice as he fought to maintain both communication modes simultaneously. "You're both saying, I carry my people's hopes, and I'm terrified of failing them. You're both asking, how do we stop being afraid of each other?" The silence that followed lasted 17 minutes. Marcus later learned that both species were processing the deepest form of communication they'd ever attempted with an alien species. Commander Zekthi of the Keth was the first to respond. His bioelectric pulse-carrying harmonics Marcus had never seen before, patterns that spoke of wonder rather than wariness. "Your poet translator carries our ancestor songs in his alien neural patterns," the pulse conveyed. "How is this possible?" Veltar Prime Minister Silith released a scent pattern so complex it took Marcus several moments to process. Future hope, mixed with present surprise and past sorrow, transformed into something approaching joy. "He makes, tomorrow, words that smell like understanding," the scent conveyed. "We had forgotten such communication was possible." The formal peace treaty was signed 3 months later, but the real peace had begun in that moment when 2 species realized that their deepest differences were, paradoxically, what made them most similar. Both were species that communicated with their entire beings, carrying the weight of their people's hopes and fears in every word. Marcus Rivera returned to Earth a changed man, his notebooks filled with bioelectric patterns and scent formulas that captured emotions no human had ever felt. But his most treasured possession was a simple message from the Galactic Council. "The poet translator has shown us that the gap between species is not in our languages, but in our willingness to carry each other's hearts in our words." Earth's gift was not translation. It was empathy made manifest. Years later, when other species conflicts arose, the Galactic Council would send the same message to Earth. "We need a translator." And Earth, understanding now what they really needed, would send another poet.